First, I want to thank Manjit and Max for giving me this privilege, because it is a very special honor to be able to introduce Dr. Kathy Woteki. Undersecretary for Research, Education, and Economics at USDA, Chief Scientist for the department. She's led delegations to China and other meetings with the G20. She's a tireless advocate for some of the most critical agencies in Washington under her wing. The research agencies, the Agricultural Research Service and Economic Research Service and the National Institutes for Food and Agriculture and the National Ag Statistics Service. She was earlier Global Director at Mars. And of course, here we so fondly remember her as Dean Woteki for her illustrious career as Dean of Agriculture and Professor of Nutrition. Her remarkable career has also included the White House, the Institutes of Medicine, a scholar who's authored scores of books and technical reports and documents about child nutrition and food safety and risk assessment. PhD in Human Nutrition from Virginia Tech. But even more than her resume, the reason it's such an honor to introduce Dr. Woteki is the larger lessons we learn from her continuously. A recognition that research funding and progress in research is nothing less than urgent. We need to look no further than the devastating consequences of climate change, the current state of child malnutrition in the world, to know that this is true. Indeed, this recognition underpins the very purpose of the Global Food Security Consortium. That's why we're here. We also learned from her that we've got to get through the hype and follow scientific evidence, whether it's on issues of climate change or biotechnology, human nutrition, food safety. If we're going to have a better day for our next generation, we've got to base these policies on evidence. There's another very important quality we learned from Catherine Woteki. Let's not ever forget this is really about people. To some extent, it may be about polar bears, but it's really about people. And if we're to change political will to get the resources that we need to deal with a planet that's getting hotter and drier and thirstier and more crowded, we've got to be able to tell this story better and more effectively, and we've got to tell this story in human terms. And finally, what we learned from Catherine Woteki is that human nutrition is the critical intersection between agriculture and health. And our policies must reflect that reality. You know, there are a lot of people in Washington who are very important and a lot of distinguished personalities and officials. But I would say this: if you're looking for someone who commands more professional respect and more admiration in that city, you're going to have to look for a long time. It's a great honor to welcome Catherine Woteki.
Well, thank you very much, David, for that kind introduction. You have been a very good friend to Iowa State, and you also remain a very good friend and ally to us at the Department of Agriculture. And we appreciate your advocacy on behalf of agriculture and on behalf of improving health through nutrition around the world. I am delighted to be back at Iowa State. I had the opportunity yesterday to speak at an international conference at your sister university up the road, the University of Minnesota. They were hosting an international conference on One Medicine, One Science, really examining the One Health approach and how it can be applied to address some of these global challenges, also sometimes called wicked problems that are facing us in food and agriculture as we think about how are we going to be able to feed this burgeoning population. And I also had the opportunity to have 3.5 hours of solitude as I was driving down this morning to kind of reflect on the papers that I heard yesterday and also on my remarks today. This conference on closing the yield gap, I think, is really a great topic for those of us who are in the food and agricultural sciences and who also care about people. So as we're thinking about this challenge of how are we going to be able to feed this estimated 9 billion people, we also recognize that there are a huge number of constraints in the amount of arable land that can be brought into production, constraints on water resources that will be available for agriculture, constraints associated with the quality of the soils in that arable land. So we have a huge number of constraints. But this whole concept of sustainable intensification of agricultural production, I think, is really the key to the pathway forward. And I also wanted to let all of you know that we within the Department of Agriculture have really embraced this concept. And as we have been establishing the priorities for our research programs, we have incorporated that underlying concept into those priority areas. So you're probably all very familiar with the 5 priority areas for our strategic plan and that are guiding the research programs in NIFA, in ARS, and ERS, and NAS. The first of the priorities is food security, globally as well as nationally. The second priority is food safety, because it's not sufficient to produce enough food. It's not going to be promoting good health if the food supply is inherently unsafe. The third priority is improving human nutrition. And again, thinking about food security for the population, it's not enough to just produce enough of the major crops. We also have to be producing an array of food products, livestock-derived products, as well as plant-derived products that are going to provide the array of essential nutrients that are necessary for good health. The fourth priority area is one that usually provokes some questions from the audience, and that is we also have to be looking to agriculture to develop the bioeconomy, to produce not only fuels, but also chemicals that are necessary for a wide variety of products important to people. And we have to be doing that along with also producing that wide array of foodstuffs that is going to promote good health. And then the fifth priority area is to understand how climate change is going to be affecting our ability to do those other big challenges and to develop resilient agricultural systems that will be able to provide all of those goods and services that we're demanding of agriculture. So that is a huge challenge for those of us that are in the food and agricultural sciences. And I think that the only way that we're going to be able to address those challenges is through a strong foundation in the food and agricultural sciences. Our success in achieving food security and fulfilling all of those other requirements that are being put on agriculture to provide the bioeconomy, provide ecosystem services, and more is going to depend on the quality of our scientific endeavors. The globalized food system requires increasingly sophisticated cross-cutting research and monitoring systems. And the global food system brings so many benefits also increases the probability that agricultural challenges are going to arise within those systems. So there's going to be a constant emergence of new problems, new pests that we have not anticipated. I want to say up front that the global food and agricultural research system is facing unprecedented challenges, and that at USDA we're addressing those challenges as being among the top priorities for the department. The challenges include emerging diseases of crops and livestock, finite arable land, constraints on water, more severe weather, increased fire, the global financial crisis that we're just recovering from, and a projection of global population growth that would require us to double our agricultural production over the next 30 to 40 years. And in addition, to do that doubling of production in a way that's going to be long-term sustainable far into the future. In addition, we're increasingly finding that changes in weather and climate are creating changes in the nutrient composition of crops that are being grown, and also may challenge us in what kinds of livestock that we're able to raise. And geographic patterns of insects, pests, and pathogens are also going to be changing. At USDA, we're focused on addressing these grand challenges of food security, food safety, bioenergy and bioproducts, climate change, and human nutrition. And these are the priorities in the research done through our intramural programs and also supported in the research that we fund that's conducted at universities. And each is a complex challenge in and of itself that's going to require a multifaceted approach to the research. Three of these big challenges in food security, food safety, and human nutrition are going to be what I'm going to be focusing on in my remarks today. And I'd argue that we need to address these three together and really think of them together with climate change to achieve a food supply that's sufficient for our growing population, safe, health promoting, and also resilient and sustainable. Several of these topics need to be regarded both as subjects of new research and also as just absolute imperatives defensively for us. Food security is a challenge that requires a universal outlook and a global examination. And as the population continues to expand, agricultural adaptation and mitigation to climate variation research is becoming a part of the key to the food security, safety, and nutritional triumvirate for well-being. We need to learn how to maintain and to increase our productivity to achieve that food security. And certainly, food safety is a goal we need to address. We need to know more about not only the characteristics of the pathogens and how to diminish foodborne illnesses, but we also know that these pathogens themselves are changing over time and are posing new challenges to the food safety systems that we have in place. When I served as Undersecretary for Food Safety, I used to say that no food is nutritious if it's not safe. And I've really come to regard food safety as being a prerequisite for food security and good nutrition. So at USDA, we either perform or we fund research that's conducted at universities on a wide variety of animal, plant, insect, fungal, and microbial species. And this Minneapolis meeting that I'm just coming from on One Medicine, One Science, listening to the discussions yesterday, it was really interesting at hearing the convergence that is occurring in so many different scientific disciplines. So in the One Health concept, it's human health, animal health, and the environmental health are all inextricably intertwined, and that really to solve any of these problems like food safety, that we really have to take into account all three aspects. We're doing much more work on water availability in our portfolio of science that we're supporting. And also, we're able now to track much better the movement of pathogens throughout the food supply. Some of these might be controlled by cold chain in the past, but have now acquired abilities to thrive even in cool temperatures. And we're also seeing, similarly with insect pests, that they're moving into new territories, and also that we're having increasingly invasive pests coming into the U.S. Through our global trade. We think there's much to be learned by examining the similarities in these different types of pest challenges and pathogen challenges. And we're also seeing, again, in that convergence within the sciences and what's being done with quantitative genomic approaches now through microbiome research, I think is another good example. So there are certainly many challenges in achieving a healthful diet for the world population, and we're going to have to be addressing it in a way that is going to take into account the development of long-term sustainable agricultural ecosystems. So I hope that as we're moving toward that goal, we can begin to organize our thinking toward the science we need to reach that healthful and sustainable diet. Calories or energy will be important, but it's not sufficient. You need that full array of nutrients required for good health. We need to take into account protein, vitamins, essential fatty acids, trace elements, and we're also going to need nutritious food to be sure that people of tomorrow are strong, intellectually able, and able to work together to support this new population. Many years ago, the Economic Research Service did an analysis of what changes would need to occur in American agriculture if the American population adopted the dietary guidelines recommendations for what constitutes a health-promoting diet. And that analysis showed that there were going to have to be some very substantial changes in agricultural production here in the U.S. in order to provide that array of foods. Dairy production would have to rise. Production of legumes would also rise very substantially, while starchy vegetable production would have had to fall, and fruit acreage would have had to double. Wheat production would have fallen off, but the U.S. population has not moved its dietary consumption patterns to be in complete alignment with those recommendations. But I've recently challenged our colleagues within ERS to take on a new area of study, and it's very much related to these thoughts that I've been sharing with you today. And the question that I'd like them to address is, when you contemplate this question of a health-promoting diet for the population of the future, will we be able to have long-term sustainable agricultural systems that would be able to provide that array of food products? And what would these agricultural systems look like? There is a little bit of work that's going on thinking along those lines, a few papers that I've read. And they have come to sometimes conclusions that are not intuitively obvious. So we have many people who are very much promoting local foods production. And at least in examining some of the work that's been done in Europe, one paper drew the conclusion that it was actually better to import tomatoes into England than it was to grow tomatoes in England, that the overall greenhouse gas and carbon footprint associated with tomato production was lower, that if you grow tomatoes in an area of Europe that's much warmer and that has the growing conditions that are much more appropriate to tomatoes. And from work that I was familiar with when I was working at Mars, there were similar conclusions drawn about rice products, that actually you had a lower carbon footprint associated with microwavable rice products than you do with parboiled rice, that you buy in a box and then have to boil at home for 30 minutes or so. So there are sometimes these analyses that are being done lead you to conclusions about what is the food product that has the lowest greenhouse gas and carbon footprint associated with it that may be counterintuitive to what you think would be the way. So I think this question of long-term sustainable food production systems and being able to provide this array of foodstuffs for good health is one that is a worthy area of investigation. And just like the previous speaker was talking about climate change modeling and the kind of assumptions that are associated with that. So now, along with providing a healthful diet, we need to put some of our thinking into questions of how can we produce this diet and at the same time have it associated with lower greenhouse gas emissions. And the questions that arise in this context, I think, are also going to be very complicated, ones in which we're not going to have a lot of data relatively freely available, and that are going to produce some answers for us that are going to be counterintuitive. Food choices which are available in the developed world can also make a difference in both health as well of the population as well as greenhouse gas emissions. And variations in greenhouse gas emissions will depend on the content of the diet. At the moment, I don't believe we have a simple answer to the question of whether there is a healthy diet that is environmentally sustainable. We know we need a high-quality protein in the diet, but the amount consumed in the United States is far more than what is required. And some suggested diets would seem to limit the range and the quantity of food to unrealistic levels, given the human practices and preferences today for diets. While vegetarians and even vegan diets are discussed often in the media, they're not emerging as the majority of the population's preference for what they would choose to eat. And as countries move up the development scale, their populations are demanding more meat products and other livestock-related food products. So we've got a lot to learn about these challenges in producing a health-promoting diet and doing it in a way that's long-term sustainable. Another challenge emerging for diet and climate change is the impact of rising temperatures on the plants and animals themselves. Insects, mycotoxins, other challenges to safety through pathogens, these are all also being affected by the changing climate. And what is going to be the collective impact of those on these agricultural systems to produce health-promoting diets? There's quite a bit of evidence that's emerged around the impact of increasing temperatures on crop yields, and we've heard some of that today. However, for a long time, we've been aware that an increase in local warming above certain levels results in crop yields or losses, or in actual micronutrient changes in composition. Some examples would be a 10% loss of antioxidant color compounds in grapes when there's a 2-degree increase in temperature above 25 degrees centigrade. Lycopene and ascorbic acid in tomatoes both decline, when the tomatoes are grown in heat above the normal growing temperatures. And we really need to be looking at post-harvest quality of foods subject to different environmental changes. And this, I think, is going to be especially true as we move to develop plants that are resistant to drought or grow under higher temperatures. So there's a reason to look at animal development as also an important area for our research to take, taking into account climate change. And at USDA, we've been working to support research across the board on livestock as well as crop effects under different climate scenarios. There's been also a lot of attention recently to plant breeding and the problems associated with the decline in the number of graduates and doctorates being granted in this area. I know that has been a major area of concern here at Iowa State, a major priority for the university. And I wanted to let you all know that we have had a plant breeding task force that we've pulled together within the department. And I've challenged them to develop a roadmap for our plant breeding activities for the future. So they're hard at work in doing that. I also thought it might be worthwhile to reflect for you on some of the new developments reflected in the Farm Bill and also the recent appropriations as they relate to the topics of the meetings yesterday and today. Because there are in both opportunities for more partnering with scientists in developing countries to focus on these problems of sustainable intensification of agricultural production. So in the Farm Bill, there is a new foundation for food and agriculture research that was authorized, and we've been working very hard at getting that foundation established. We expect that it will be stood up later this summer. There will be, as the law prescribes, a board of 15 people that will be appointed. And when the board is appointed this summer, there will be a transfer of $200 million as an initial endowment to the foundation from the CCC funds. The board is to oversee a program of research that will provide new opportunities to partner with the private sector, to partner with foundations, to partner with people from non-governmental organizations in support of agricultural research. So stay tuned for new developments, and also I think this new board would also be very interested in hearing ideas about how it might function once it's up and operational. So that's one new development, and through these public-private partnerships that the foundation will be providing matching funds to funds that are brought to it. I think there also will be a lot of opportunities to work on some of these global food, filling the gap and kind of research that has been the focus of this consortium, closing the yield gap. Another new development is in the 2015 budget request. So in the president's budget that is now under consideration by the appropriators, there is a request for $75 million to support 3 what are called innovation institutes. The innovation institutes were recommended by the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology as being a way that USDA should focus research onto problems of major importance in agriculture. So in the budget request, this $75 million would support 3 innovation institutes each of which would be funded at the level of $25 million a year for up to 5 years. And the 3 topics for these innovation institutes, the first one is Pollinator Health, a major interest, major concern here in the US as well as globally. Second one is antimicrobial resistance. And last summer, the leaders of the G8 countries at their summit meeting in England identified antimicrobial resistance as being a major problem facing public health globally. And this Innovation Institute would be focusing on the use of antibiotics in animal agriculture, and more importantly, funding research on identifying alternatives to their use, as well as furthering fundamental understanding of the pathogen-antibiotic interrelationships. The third of the Innovation Institutes would be one of the network of national manufacturing institutes that President Obama has been advocating for. And this network of national manufacturing would be focused on bioproducts, use of agriculture wastes and other agricultural products for the development of chemicals with multiple uses and applications. The third new opportunity that I wanted to highlight is the work that we've been doing to open up data of importance to agriculture and nutrition. And during the US presidency of the G8, just 2 years ago, we committed to holding an international conference on open data for agriculture and nutrition, which was held just a year ago today in Washington, D.C. At that conference, the G7 countries, along with the European Union, made public action plans for how they were going to make data that was generated as the result of government investment publicly available and accessible. The U.S. has been working on implementing our action plan. We've been in touch with our colleagues in the other countries that pledged to open up their data. And we've all been using a very similar approach, prioritizing making agricultural data sets available and using, in the case of the U.S., our data.gov portal as a way for finding entry to these data sets. I'm just back from a meeting last week with our colleagues in the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, along with a number of countries and about 80 partners that have signed on to a global open data for agriculture and nutrition initiative. And there is a growing momentum behind this movement. And the whole aim is to have countries prioritize making, first of all, having policies for public access to data that's the result of the government investment, having those data available in machine-readable form, and then within those data sets that are being made available, prioritizing those that relate to agriculture. So other countries are partnering with us on this initiative, and we will be bringing it to a meeting in June of the G20 countries to also see whether we can generate some additional commitments among the G20 countries for opening up their data. This is certainly going to be important for a variety of different purposes, but we also have a firm belief that by opening data, that it's also going to help to improve our ability as a research community to sustainably intensify agricultural production. Lastly, I wanted to comment on, in response to some of the closing comments that Casper Amand made about the necessity for the climate modeling to have better data, relevant analysis, and also to have information being made available coming out of these analyses on the effects of climate change on agricultural production. The Secretary did announce last year his intent to establish regional climate hubs in the United States. And just about 6 weeks ago, we announced the 7 climate hubs, along with 3 what are called sub-hubs, whose purpose is to, first of all, access those data and those models that are available, and to draw on the 30-plus years of research that we have been sponsoring at USDA on climate change and its effects on agriculture, harness all of that into regional analysis, partner with universities, partner with the extension systems, and partner, most importantly, with the private sector to get applications and tools into farmers' hands so that they can be making informed decisions based on this analysis and research that's been ongoing for many years. So we have a lot of new ideas that are coming to the fore that I think are going to be very helpful in helping us to close this very important yield gap. Got a lot of challenges, got a lot of people who can help. Many of you are in this audience today by virtue of being here. You're interested in, I think, how you can use your skills in helping us to address this. So together, I think we can set a research agenda for the future, and we can work to see that the coming generations are equipped to meet these challenges. So thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Woteki has agreed to take some questions. Well, I will lead off. My prerogative. You testify a lot before Congress, before appropriators and authorizers. What impresses you today about the level of awareness or understanding about these research priorities and how they need to be dealt with at the congressional level?
That is an interesting challenge. And I didn't mean that to be funny. Maybe that was nervous laughter. We have a real divide when it comes to consideration of the appropriations for my mission area and how to address these global challenges. So when I testify in defense of our budget requests, the line of questioning that I get is usually very specific to the interests of a specific state, the agricultural concerns within that state, and always with the underlying sentiment that we're not doing enough to address those local challenges, local and state challenges. So it's very much a US-centric line of questioning. That is probably appropriately so, because we are, by mission, primarily a domestic-oriented portfolio of research agencies that I have oversight over. But we also do have roles and responsibilities in the international area. So it's, you know, again, your question was about the kind of questions that we get, and the questions are largely domestic in orientation.
Dr. Woteki, a question about the innovation institutes. So what can we do to help Congress decide to actually appropriate new dollars to stand those 3 institutes up? And then the second is that the PCAST report proposed 6 of these institutes. Is there, assuming that Congress will appropriate the dollars for the 3, is there thought that the next administration budget would have 3 more?
Well, certainly these first 3 were our first foray towards working towards having the complete portfolio of 6 innovation institutes that PCAST had recommended. So yes, we're thinking that future budgets will also request funds for new innovation institutes. And as to what can be done to help, I think it's always helpful when universities, faculty, as well as the leadership within the universities and the private sector indicate to their congressional delegations that they see that there is a purpose, a need for the administration proposal. So that education that you could do of your congressional delegations, I think would be something that we would find very, very helpful and supportive. I know as I've gone around, we've done a series of listening sessions at different universities. We held one in Washington. We've had a lot of interest in the innovation institutes. Every talk that I have given for the last several months, there's also been on the part of the audience a lot of interest in this new approach. These would be public-private partnerships for providing ways to really speed the adoption of the new technologies that would be coming out of the research done by the Institute. So it's a new model for the way that we would be working, just like the foundation would be a new model. So, you know, to the extent that there is interest on the part of the private sector and universities in furthering this concept, I think that's always helpful for Congress to hear.
Coming.
Great, thank you. So you mentioned this board or commission, 15-member, that's being constituted. I just wonder if you could address specifically how the social and behavioral aspects, picking up on the example you gave about having the new dietary guidelines, but them not being adopted. The same thing applies with new agricultural technologies, particularly when we're looking international. If you comment about how that's will be featuring into the way of thinking and deliberations of that. Thanks.
Well, there's a lot of unknowns about this foundation. If you read the authorizing legislation, it does specify that the foundation will do work in 7 areas. And the 7th, is in economics and the social sciences. So it is included. How the foundation will do its work is not specified in the legislation, other than to offer that $200 million that will be transferred to the foundation will be used to match funds that will be provided by external partners. So again, there's going to be a lot that this new board is going to work on in developing its program of work. they do have some models in the NIH Foundation. There's a foundation for the Food and Drug Administration, a number of them, one also for the Forest Service. So there are different models to look at, but this new board is going to have a whole lot of decisions to make about how they're going to be putting together the program for the foundation.
Hi, I'm Laura Merrick in the Agronomy Department at Iowa State, and I wanted to hear just a little bit more about the plant breeding task force. I guess, although you hinted at it, I'm wondering whether the emphasis is indeed graduate level education of plant breeders. And the other question has to do with essentially what David Lambert asked you first, and the relative emphasis for this task force in being charged to examine education needs domestically versus global needs for training of plant breeders.
Well, in the charge that I've given to this plant breeding task force, they are to develop a roadmap for us that is going to include the educational pipeline. You know, what should we be doing in that area, as well as more across all of the agencies with an interest in plant breeding. How should we be shaping those programs of work, the intramural as well as the extramural, to take into account the comments that we heard at a workshop that we held last year. So it's this task force work is not exclusively in the education domain, but it's, you know, the whole portfolio of plant breeding work that we support, and in addition take care of what we should be doing in this pipeline as well. And then the question that David asked, I think I answered that first. The task force is really primarily domestic in orientation, but it's not limited to that.
Further exercising my prerogative. It seems quite a paradox when you look at all of the research priorities you mentioned in agriculture: global food security, food safety, human nutrition, obesity, bioenergy, climate change. Almost every one of those issue areas are designed to take pressure off the biomedical budget. And yet, agricultural research is a 10th or 20th of biomedical. How do we tell the story more effectively on the importance of agricultural research and what it means for people? You do it very well, but what lessons do you have for us? How do we tell this story better?
Well, I think we all need to be doing a better job at it, and I include us at USDA in that category. Just as a little fact that I stumbled on about a year ago, NIH has a contract, an annual, that they had awarded last year. It was contested, so there was a little article in the Washington Post about it. And then when the contract was finally awarded, there was an article saying that this contested contract. So for its public relations and communications, the NIH awarded a $500 million 5-year contract. We have nothing like that. I have one communications person in my office. We have a small number of communications people in each of the 4 agencies. We produce the Amber Waves out of ERS. We produce a magazine out of ARS. both of which are now going, well, actually ERS is up in a digital format, ARS is coming up in a digital format. But the amount of resource that we put into our communications is very, very small. I think one of the things I've been working on is trying to do a better job and to also modernize the way that we are communicating. So that's one thing I think that we can do better, make better use of the resource that we do have. I think we all need to be telling the stories better, and I know through APLU, the land-grant university system has been working hard to really pull together those stories of success in a way that can be used to talk to a lot of people, not just members of your state legislature or the Congress, but also to disseminate that information more broadly. But I remain confident that this intersection, this convergence that I was talking about, is happening. That people in very influential places are beginning to see that the agriculture and agricultural environment interface is absolutely critical for long-term health of our populations. And when you get somebody like Bill Gates, turning the resources of his foundation in this direction, and as he did a couple of weeks ago, advocating in the Senate for this new foundation for food and agriculture research, that there are, as I said, some people in very influential areas who do see this as a very important area, and that's going to also, I think, pay off over time. You're also seeing major publications, The Economist, major newspapers, really featuring how important food security issues are and doing it on a fairly regular basis. So I think the public awareness is also increasing.
Dr. Woteki, thank you very much.